Welcome to this explainer. Look, as an award-winning editor, I know tax law can seem incredibly dry. That's why I've poured all my design skills into making this explainer highly visual, super colorful, and genuinely fun for you commerce students. Today, we're decoding the taxation framework for partnership firms and LLDs under the brand new 2025 Act. I want you to look at the animated graphics I've set up here. Picture three completely chaotic business partners. Let's call them Amar, Akbar, and Anthony. They've just burst into their highly stressed chartered accountant's office carrying literal shoeboxes full of crumpled receipts, half-baked business plans, and absolutely zero understanding of tax law. Our mission today? To help their CA turn this absolute nightmare into a perfectly compliant tax filing. And in the process, make sure you totally master this chapter. Okay, let's dive into this. Here's the agenda I've mapped out for us. First, the firm versus LLP showdown. Second, the great audit panic. Third, calculating the book profit. Fourth, tax rates and sneaky rules. And finally, changes, succession, and dissolution. Let's get moving. Section 1. Firm versus LLP showdown. Amar, Akbar, and Anthony's big choice. Right, so before their CA completely loses his mind sorting those receipts, our trio faces their first major dilemma: choosing a legal structure. I designed this neat little text comparison so you can visualize it. A traditional partnership firm has no separate identity from our guys, and it comes with unlimited liability. That means if the business goes bankrupt, the creditors are literally coming for Anthony's vintage car and Amar's house. But in LLP, it's got a separate identity, perpetual succession, and limited liability. I like to animate it as a shiny corporate shield. Now, from a corporate law perspective, they are totally different beasts. But for income tax, well, as you'll see, the taxman treats them almost exactly the same. Before we go any further, we need to do some mental decluttering. You know those old terms, previous year and assessment year? Forget them. Toss them in the trash. Under the new Income Tax Act of 2025, those terms are completely dropped. The unified terminology is now simply the tax year. Highlight it, underline it, and permanently memorize it. Now, if our chaotic trio actually wants the tax department to treat them as a legitimate firm so they can claim their business expenses, they absolutely must satisfy Section 325. They need a written deed, clearly specified profit shares, and they have to file a certified copy with their very first tax return. Oh, and if they change their profit sharing ratio because Akbar did all the work this year, they have to submit a revised copy. If they fail these basic conditions, absolute disaster strikes. The CA can't save them. Section 326 kicks in, and they lose all tax deductions for partner interest and salaries. Basically, they'd be paying a flat tax on money they already paid out to themselves. Section 2. The Great Audit Panic. The CA's Nightmare. This is where the CA really starts sweating. What kind of audit do they actually need? What's really interesting about this table I threw together is the clear contrast. A tax audit under the new Section 63 is purely an income tax compliance check. But a statutory audit? That's checking if the accounts show a true and fair view under company or LLP law. The massive difference here is applicability. Regular traditional partnership firms never require a statutory audit. Literally never. But LLPs, they get hit with one if their turnover crosses 40 lakhs or their capital crosses 25 lakhs. So, how do we solve this without having a mental breakdown? By applying two golden rules. First, the statutory audit test. You just ask, is it an LLP crossing the 40 lakh turnover or 25 lakh capital mark? Second, the tax audit test, under Section 63, which introduces this brilliant digital twist. Is their turnover over 1 crore? If yes, it's audit time. But if they do almost all their business digitally, meaning their cash receipts and payments are 5% or less, the government actually rewards them by bumping that audit threshold all the way up to 10 crores. Let's look at these hilarious real-world scenarios to see exactly how this works. Look at Alpha Tech LLP, 12 crores turnover, but only 2% cash. They need a statutory audit because they're a massive LLP, and they need a tax audit because they cross that 10 crore mega limit. Now look at Vibrant Traders down at the bottom. Only 2.5 crores turnover, but a whopping 15% in cash. Because they failed that 5% digital cash rule, their tax audit limit drops right back down to 1 crore. Since they are at 2.5 crores, boom, tax audit required. Keep your cash transactions low, folks, or your auditor is going to charge you extra. Welcome to the form filing frenzy. I designed this timeline so you can visually memorize the CA's desperate race against the clock under Section 263. May 30th is MCA Form 11. July 31st is the ITR 5 deadline for non-audit cases. Now, if you need a tax audit, the CA has to file the audit report by September 30th, exactly 1 month before the audit case ITR5 deadline on October 31st. Oh, and October 31st is also when MCA Form 8 is due for LLPs. Miss these, and the late fees under Section 234F are going to make our partners weep.
Section 3. Calculating the book profit. Sorting the shoebox of receipts.
Okay, the deadlines are set, the audits are figured out. Now, the CA has to dump out that shoebox of receipts and actually do the math under Section 35. The absolute crucial point here is that you can't just take the net profit from the P&L and call it a day. Partners love to sneak in massive salaries and crazy interest rates on their capital to artificially drop the firm's taxable profit, right? Well, the tax department knows this trick, so we calculate the book profit. We start with the P&L net profit, and we add back all those disallowed expenses, reserves, personal expenses, partner salaries, and any interest paid to partners over 12%. Then we subtract non-business income like dividends. This gives us the true, pure operational book profit. Check out this beautiful bar chart I whipped up for you. Once we have that book profit, we have to figure out how much salary Amar, Akbar, and Anthony are actually allowed to pocket as a valid business deduction. Section 35E gives us these statutory remuneration limits. On the first 6 lakhs of book profit, they can claim the higher of 3 lakhs or 90% of the book profit. For anything above that first 6 lakhs, they can only claim 60% as a deduction. Anything they pay themselves beyond these limits is strictly disallowed, and the firm is going to have to pay tax on it. And here is how the whole shebang comes together perfectly. We take that book profit, we finally subtract that allowable remuneration we just calculated, and that gives us the true business income. But we aren't done. The CA then adds in income from house property, capital gains, and other sources. Subtract any Chapter 8 deductions, and voila, we have finally arrived at the total income of the firm. This right here is the magic number the taxman is looking for. But wait, there's a brutal reality check if our trio chose an LLP. LLPs are subject to the Alternative Minimum Tax, or AMT. If their regular calculated tax is suspiciously low, they hit a floor. They must pay at least 18.5% of their adjusted total income. The rule is incredibly simple: pay the normal tax or the AMT, whichever is higher. Also, under Section 58, LLPs are entirely banned from using the easy presumptive taxation scheme. Even if they're a tiny LLP, they must maintain full books of accounts. No shortcuts allowed for corporate shields. Section 4. Tax rates and sneaky rules. Paying the piper. We've done all the math. Now it's time to see what percentage the government is actually taking from our chaotic trio. Here are the flat rates under the 2025 Act. Regular business income is taxed at a heavy, flat 30%. No sliding slabs for firms. If they win the lottery or bet on sports, that's also 30%. Short-term capital gains on listed equity sit at 20%, while long-term capital gains get a much nicer 12.5% rate. Oh, and if Amar, Akbar, and Anthony have a phenomenal year, and the firm's total income crosses 1 crore, bam! A 12% surcharge is tacked right on. Plus, there's always that unavoidable 4% health and education cess added at the very end. I put this massive number on the screen because it completely dictates this section: 12%. This is the absolute maximum simple interest per annum that a firm can pay on a partner's capital or loan and still claim it as a business deduction. If the partnership deed says Anthony gets 18% interest on the capital he invested, the tax department is literally going to laugh, allow 12%, and entirely disallow the remaining 6%. But what happens when things go terribly wrong and the firm makes a loss? I've animated the 3 steps for you. First, you set off the loss against current profits instantly. If there's still a loss, you carry it forward to the next tax year. But look closely at step 3, the Section 119 retired partner rule. If Anthony decides he's had enough of Amar and Akbar's antics and retires, his specific share of the carried forward loss dies with him. It permanently lapses. The remaining partners cannot use Anthony's share of the loss to lower their future taxes. Honestly, it's tragic for them, but great for the taxman.
Section 5. Changes, succession, and dissolution. The end of the road.
So what happens when the partners fight, change the whole structure, or just decide to walk away? Well, the tax department treats structural shifts very precisely. Under Section 327, if a new partner joins or the profit-sharing ratio changes, but the core firm continues, it's a change in constitution. That means one continuous tax assessment.
But under Section 328, if the old firm completely shuts down and a brand new entity takes over the business, that is succession. The memory mantra you need here is old ends plus new starts equals succession. And when that happens, the tax department makes two entirely separate tax assessments, one for the dead firm and one for the newborn. All right, now we get to the really scary stuff. Section 329, joint and several liability. The memory tip here is one for all for one, but definitely not in a fun, heroic way. If Amr, Akbar, and Anthony's traditional firm owes 12 lakhs in taxes and defaults, the tax department doesn't have to politely ask each of them for 4 lakhs. No way. They can look at Amr, see he has a really nice bank balance, and mercilessly drain all 12 lakhs directly from his personal account. Amr is fully 100% responsible for the firm's unpaid tax. What if they think they can just close the doors and hide? Nice try. Section 330 covers the dissolution of a firm. The memory tip is, firm dissolves but tax liability continues. If they shut down the firm on March 31st, and 2 years later an auditor finds an unpaid tax bill, the assessing officer will track down Amr, Akbar, and Anthony. The firm might be completely dead, but the ex-partners remain personally liable to pay every single rupee owed from the time the firm was active. Which brings us to our final slide, and a pretty terrifying reality check under Section 331. Let's say our trio chose an LLP to get that sweet, limited liability corporate shield we talked about at the very beginning of this explainer. Well, if the LLP goes into liquidation with 0 assets and owes millions in tax, the Income Tax Act can actually override corporate law. The taxman can literally pierce that corporate veil and go after their personal homes and bank accounts anyway. It really makes you wonder, if the government can just shatter your corporate shield whenever it wants its money, how safe is limited liability really? Think about that. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the colorful graphics and that this explainer brought some clarity to a really complex topic. Keep studying, and I'll catch you next time.